John, I'm not even going to ask you to compare this to any other time in political history because there isn't a comparison. But after watching last night, what does it tell you about where the country is right now? And what is this election going to say about the American people?
Depends on both the outcome of the election and then the outcome of the transfer of power, which the president misstated as transition last night. At this point, I don't think Joe Biden is on the ballot. I think we are as a nation. St. Augustine once defined a nation as a multitude of rational beings who are united by the common objects of their love, And we have a very clear choice in 5 weeks to decide what we love in common. Do we love decency? Do we love democracy? Do we love the rule of law? And if we don't, then we have to confront that and head off that cliff totally. But I think that I had a visceral reaction to the way the president behaved last night. I understand, having written a lot of headlines in my life, that you can't capture everything. But I'm a little disappointed, I must say, in seeing the images you've been showing. It wasn't that chaos reigned last night. It was that Donald Trump's chaos reigned last night. He caused this. And I don't think we serve the truth. I don't think we serve the country very well by somehow pretending that the process is broken or that it was a dumpster fire. If it was a dumpster fire, it was one that Donald Trump set. And I think we should be honest about that.
Aaron, in terms of serving the truth, you've got a lot of suburbanites out there who the president has said this civil unrest, these riots are going to be in your backyard. He's been saying it for weeks, if not months. Last night, he pushed Joe Biden and said, tell me a police group, a law enforcement group that's endorsed you. And Joe Biden didn't say anything. For Joe Biden, it almost seemed like a cringeworthy moment. However, the truth is what matters. The president wasn't even telling the truth. He said just yesterday, the sheriff out in Portland called him up or, endorsed him. And immediately after, we saw a tweet from that sheriff that said, absolutely, that didn't happen and it never will. How does Joe Biden combat this when he has the truth on his side, but people keep hearing the president's lies over and over?
Well, that certainly is the challenge, Stephanie, for Joe Biden. And we saw him struggling mightily against the dysfunction that was on full display last night, to John Meacham's point, that the president was largely, mostly initiating throughout the night. I had a colleague who observed as well that Chris Wallace had about as much control of that stage as a substitute teacher in a classroom. So Joe Biden, who was really kind of at his best when he was breaking through that fourth wall and kind of directly addressing voters instead of getting sucked into the fight that Donald Trump wanted to have directly with him. That is really what I've heard from voters and observers and supporters of his that said that was when he was at his best, when he was speaking directly to the voters and not really addressing the president or responding to the attacks that he continued to try to land with him when he was at times acting more like the moderator than a candidate, posing questions directly to Joe Biden and deflecting from his own record and trying to sow that chaos in real time.
Tim, give us some political strategy here. You've worked on campaigns. President Trump's base is already fired up. They are ride or die Trump supporters, Trump lovers. How does president's performance last night help with any possible swing voters? I'm talking about my suburban mother.
Yeah, look, I think it's funny. There's a tendency on these panels to try to analyze Donald Trump's actions as if he's, engaging in some deep political strategy, when he just acts on gut primal instinct. This is who Donald Trump is. He's a bully, he's a racist, and he's going to act like a bully and a racist. And so, it doesn't matter what Chris Christie tells him to do. He's not going to do it. He sees everybody told him not to do this last time. Everybody said he was going to lose, and he won anyway. So why would he listen to them? And so, look, I think that maybe last night continues to help with his strategy, which is to juice up the turnout among working class white voters in the Midwest. He sees that as his path to victory, along with, I think, a disruption in the voting process through coronavirus, which brings down the turnout among other groups. We'll see if that strategy works. It worked last time, but I think he had the benefit of having third parties. And so he's going to continue to do that. I don't see any payon coming to the suburban mother coming in the next two debates. I do just want to say really quick, Stephanie, on the substance, his back-to-back answers, refusing to condemn the Proud Boys, telling them that they should stand back and stand by as we look at the right, and then following that up with an answer where he talked about a non-existent coup that happened in 2016 and the fact that we cannot trust the vote in 2020 because of actors in Philly. I mean, those are the two most despicable answers that any politician has given in any debate in my entire life. John is the historian. Maybe something happened in 1886 that was more despicable than that. But we can't overlook that just because we're talking about, the figure skating judging points of how each candidate performed.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.